Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jason here. I'm here with Joe Zack, who's a longtime full-stack developer who's mainly focused on web development and is also 1/3 of the CodingBlocks podcast, which is where I learned about Joe, and I've been listening to him since episode 1. I really love the podcast. Everybody watching this, after you're done or listening, definitely go subscribe and check it out. It's one of my favorites. I listen to it every week, and they just talk about cool .NET and C# related stuff and other things along the way, but I just feel like I learn a lot from that. So I wanted to say thanks for having that podcast and being so consistent and just constantly releasing these episodes with cool info, man.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm a big fan of yours. I've been watching a lot of videos and I've been kind of on the outside looking into game development for a long time. So it's been nice to have things like your channel that kind of speak my language and also kind of help me learn a little bit more about the things like I really want to do.
Oh, nice. Thanks, man. So I think we both kind of have semi-similar backgrounds too. And just for everybody watching, this is going to be less of a one-on-one interview and more of like a conversation about a lot of things, but we both have experience with enterprise and web type stuff. And I wanted to talk to Joe a lot about the process of kind of doing that transition and the differences between their working on games as a hobby on the side and maybe even turning into full-time stuff. And just, like I said, talk about the differences in what it's like working on a web project versus building a game. Like, what are the technical changes? What's the environment like and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll just kind of get going. One of the things we were talking about a little bit before the show started recording was unit testing, for example. Sounds like a good thing to kind of kick it off with if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things when we first started watching like the Unity tutorials and working through some of the stuff on the websites, I noticed that a lot of them didn't really work in the same way that I was used to building software. They were much, the tutorials are, and it makes sense to do it this way, are very much based around like, okay, you build this and then you build that. And then by the time you're done, you make the game. And I was used to kind of writing like tests first, kind of thinking a little bit more about the whole picture before I even get started because I'm used to kind of knowing where I'm going. And so the tutorials just didn't really line up with the way I kind of thought. And the tutorials also kind of focus a lot on kind of basics of programming, which were like mundane and kind of frustrating for me to kind of sit through that when I didn't understand the bigger level picture of like where we're headed with the game. And so things like the unit tests and even being able to add like third-party libraries that I was used to using and kind of having in my tool belt and not really being able to do that or not understanding how to do that with, because it didn't really work if you just added it through Visual Studio because Unity would kind of blow it away. And so I had a lot of frustrations when I first tried to get started with Unity, and I'm still cracking at it.
Yeah, and for the longest time, you couldn't even pull in the majority of those DLLs and dependencies when we were stuck with the old mono. It's pretty new that we've gotten the latest C# in there and been able to actually pull a lot of that stuff in, which is nice and probably something I should revisit too, because I just kind of, when I started with Unity back in the 3 or 4 days, that was just not an option at all. You could maybe find something that was ported over to mono and worked on old mono, but it was really rare. But most libraries just didn't work. And now that's kind of different. So something that I should probably reevaluate as well and just start looking at that more often just for alternatives to stuff instead of recreating things that probably already exist and just weren't available in Unity before.
Yeah, one of the first things I did was actually I found an article where someone did like I don't want to say ray tracing, but basically like a light algorithm for a roguelike game where you kind of try to figure out what the character could see based on walls and light in the room. And I took that library and I ported it over and was able to compile it for mono. I forget what the actual target was, but I talked to the author of the article and was like, hey, can I put this up? Because I really want to use it in my game. And I don't see how to get it any other way.
Oh, that's really cool. And it just worked?
Yeah, it just worked. It's the Shadowcaster library. It was written by, well, I probably should look that up, but maybe I can send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, we can put the link in the description and stuff. That's pretty cool. That sounds neat. I like that idea of just pulling in these the libraries and stuff. I've got to start doing it again. So yeah, unit testing was one of the things you'd mentioned. Were you able to get that working? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, sorry. What I ended up doing was kind of taking off the things like the behaviors and the logic that I wanted to do, and kind of doing them outside in other libraries and just kind of bringing them in. So that way, it let me kind of work in the flow that I was used to. And then I would just try to kind of bring these logic DLLs over and kind of import them. But it didn't work out very well at all. So I definitely don't recommend that. I was really trying to fight Unity at that point, and I wasn't going with the flow. I didn't know enough even about what I was fighting. I was just trying to kind of do things the way I was always used to, and then kind of drag and drop them over and get it working. And I ended up recreating all sorts of stuff that was in Unity already. I reinvented bounding boxes and like collisions and all sorts of dumb stuff. And
Yeah.
it was all tested though.
You're not the first one to do it. I mean, I've done it myself. I've seen plenty of other people do exactly that, where they just go through and recreate core features of the engine or things that you really can't do better than they've already done because they're directly, doing it all in C++ and have a lot more optimization down there. And you're trying to recreate these things and they're just there in a hidden little window or menu that you don't know about. I actually did a whole video on that recently. The most recent video I released was just about that kind of stuff, or that was a big part of it. Okay, make sure that you know all of these different parts. And there's a lot to the editor. I know when we were talking earlier, you'd mentioned that it had a big UI with a bunch of stuff. And I don't know about your first experience with it, but when I first opened up the Unity editor many, many years ago, it didn't look very different. It was full of just windows and tabs everywhere. I had no idea what to do. I was like, what is all this crap? I don't know what any of these windows are. It felt like when the first time I opened up like Maya or 3D Studio, it's like all these things here, no clue where to start. I'm curious if it was like that for you, or if you had different experience, or how'd that go?
Yeah, I definitely started tutorial first, so it kind of did a good job of showing me kind of around. I definitely like the tutorials for that because it got me used to like seeing the camera, only focusing on the camera. And now we're looking at scenes and only focusing on scenes, and now it's sound. And so that was really good about kind of stepping me through those individual pieces. But then when I kind of started to go off the rails, it just didn't go so well because, I was trying to do everything in my own little library, dynamically bringing in. So I would have this like little scene with a couple little squares in the corner that were invisible, and then I would hit play and it wouldn't work. And so I had nothing to look at. And then I'd watch like your videos like, oh, you're dragging prefabs around or using the UI or doing this animator thing, which was totally different how I was doing everything. And I was trying to do a turn-based kind of roguelike game where you're kind of walking around. And so I thought I was being smart, like, oh, I'll do everything offline and in my little third-party library, I'll bring it in. And then I'm just doing the face over here. And I wasn't working with gravity. I wasn't working with collisions. I was just reinventing the whole wheel and just doing a bad job of it.
Yeah, and you can do that. I've seen that there are some valid reasons to do stuff like that too. Just not for, I'd say definitely not for your first game and not for a single player type game really. It works out really well if you want to do some sort of a networked game or a server authoritative thing where you want to be able to run all that code outside of a Unity instance as well. It's something at massive scale where you're running through all this data processing constantly, and you may not even want it in C#. You might want it, some other API somewhere. But I've seen a lot of people do exactly what you're saying too, though, where they try to write it all in code. Because when you're, a web developer or standard C# developer, you're very rarely using the editor. Like back in the old WinForms days, you might have dragged some stuff around and moved some things. Or if you're doing some WPF, you might be editing XAML and seeing it or whatever. Or you're doing the web stuff, you can kind of see what's going on, but you're typing it all, right? You're just constantly coding. You're not really doing drag and drop type stuff. So I think a lot of the time, in my experience, programmer friends, they get in and they think of, they already have this aversion to drag and drop type stuff, and they think that's probably the bad way to do it because it's the bad way everywhere else. When really it's generally the best way to do it because underneath it's hooking things up right. Kind of the opposite of what all the old frameworks used to do, right? It's also not doing too much complicated stuff in there. So
yeah, I ended up kind of hitting the brakes on my project. I was like, this is not the right way of doing things. And I typically with learning anything new, like if I want to learn a new language or something, I'll start with a little side project. I'll get it working. I'll move on. But in a way, I started to question like whether or not that was going to work here because there was so much big stuff to do. And I wondered like, am I just kind of teaching myself bad patterns by going off and trying to do this without really knowing a lot about the tools? So if I tried to write Flappy Bird and I did it in my own bad way, the next game I write, am I just going to continue on with those bad patterns without actually learning the right way of doing things? Or, I just wasn't really sure how to approach it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So the thought that came to mind was when you said that it was a little project, this roguelike game. It is and I saw this lot. It's funny. I was actually talking to a really cool guy, Ed, just a little while before that, and he was talking about his Unity project that he worked on, and how, when he started it, he thought, oh, this is kind of a little project, like it's a word game, it's a cool game. But then you start to realize all of the surrounding systems and things that come together to actually make this game. Like if you're making, just the basics of the roguelike, it's not that complicated, but when you start adding in all of the extra functionality, all the features, all the things that make it special and unique, and then you start putting in menus and whatever other stuff, achievements, and it gets big. It builds up really fast. I think people really often underestimate the scale of games. And I mean, you see this, like there's always the recommendation, like don't build an MMO first, right? Because people think like, oh, I'm going to build an MMO, but it's not going to be it's not going to be a big one. It's going to be a simple MMO, right? It's going to be like an easy one, like one of those things that only took hundreds of people a couple of years to build.
Right. I got 3 hours a week to spend, except for the next 2 weeks. But then I'll be back, hard, maybe 3-4 hours a week.
Yeah, right. Get done with that thing, no time. You just have 3 classes instead of 12, right?
Right.
So I think it's the same with regular software development too, though. People are generally pretty bad at estimating, and they're very bad at estimating things that they're not familiar with.
Right.
And with games, I think people overestimate they underestimate how hard it's going to be. They overestimate the simplicity of the project, because they get that core game loop, the core mechanic, and they think I can easily do that core mechanic, and just kind of forget that there's a million other things. Like you got these little flashy buttons that are bouncing around. That's going to take you a day or two. You got this thing and that, whatever it is, they all add up, and they all just kind of build up into more and more complication and technical debt, and things start to get painful and slow.
Right.
So I always recommend going with nice, simple projects first, and repeating or building very easily repeatable games. So like find a game that you like. It's a very simple mobile game that doesn't have a bunch of menus and stuff, and recreate that. Then go on to the next one, recreate that, and do them like in 1 or 2 week sprints, where you're just going through, figuring out how this thing works and learning. Because then it's not just the learning, but it's also the practice of redoing the thing, like especially when you're getting started, that continual repetitive practice of, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to, the second time or maybe the third time through, I'm going to remember these function calls and not have to go look them up, right? And maybe I'll be able to build the whole thing without doing as much searching to figure out, only having to search for the new stuff instead of researching for everything that I needed to do. So that's, yeah.
And I ended up doing another little game where I tried to scope things down, and I did a better job this time. And I did quote unquote finish it. It's just like a one little thing. You can drag a little robot around a room, and he kind of shoots around like a pinball, I guess.
Oh,
and,
cool.
I was happy to call that kind of done. So I met my goals for the project, and I felt good. And one thing I kind of learned from that, which may or not be true, is that in that case I tried to focus more on what Unity provided, and so I used their gravity, I used their collisions, a couple other things. And what I found is that like I was kind of scared of the physics stuff, because I just assumed physics was hard, but it actually was a lot easier than me trying to kind of figure out whether to move the guy 10 pixels or 20 pixels and then getting out of sync with the animations and all the other sort of problems that I ran into with my little roguelike.
Yeah, it's dramatically easier to use the built-in stuff, because it's built in for a reason, because those were all problems that everybody had to solve. And before Unity and Unreal and just commercial game engines were available, everybody had to solve these problems, and optimize them constantly for every single company or every game. Everybody had their own engines, and it's still pretty common. There's still a lot of companies that have their own engines, just partially because that's what they're used to, because they've been doing it for 20 years before there were options. But yeah, you definitely want to take advantage of pretty much everything in the engine. There are very few things that I recommend people look at alternative options for. Most of the built-in things are pretty good. Like the only one that comes to mind now was like the terrain, but that got rebuilt. There's a new terrain system, not an issue anymore. Or navigation. Navigation back in the old days was, not an option, and then not a very good option. And there were alternatives that you could pull in, or you could code your own, and now it's good. So it's like there's pretty much, I can't think of many systems, or any systems really, that I would want to rewrite or custom build now. They all just kind of work. They work pretty well. They do what I want them to do, and they save me a ton of time. And the biggest benefit there, and I think probably the thing that a lot of people lose out on, is the time savings. So if you're not having to code a physics check, or you're not having to remake a bounding box, and you're just saying, hey, on collision enter, do this thing, your task went from many, many days or weeks to a couple minutes. And it's probably better, more performant, and just works.
Yeah, I like that. And also it lets me focus more on my game and like the things that make my game unique or interesting, and I'm less about like sound mixing or whatever. So
and that's where you want to be.
Yeah, I really like that. I was curious about like building kind of smaller games. Do you like? Is there like a particular genre or kind of game? Like I kind of assumed like 3D was super hard and like 2D was going to be easy, and maybe turn-based would be the easiest of all. Like, does that make sense, or am I crazy?
So the easiest I would say is 2D hyper casual type stuff.
Like a match 3.
Simple games, like even simpler than match 3, like the shoot darts at a spinning circle type games. The slice a block, or the Flappy Bird, or Crossy Roads, or any of those types of things. I did a video on how to make balls because my daughter played it, and I was like, oh, it's kind of fun. One of the guys I know actually made another copy of it, made turbo balls, and now I just play that because it's faster.
Oh, cool.
But I think that those kinds of games are generally the easiest because there's really not much state management or other stuff going on. It's just a matter of, let's get this one mechanic right. Let's get it kind of figured out and polished. And then you can work on a bunch of different things in the editor. And there's really very little code in those. So it's a lot of just kind of working with the systems, like launch a ball in a direction, or maybe in a match 3, which is, again, a bit more complicated. You're doing some checks and stuff. So in fact, yeah, I would say don't do a match 3 for your first game for sure. Like,
okay,
like
good.
Game 4 or 5, because you have the complication. You have a lot of code there, trying to figure out the grid, figure out what's near what, how things fall, and all that. It's not nearly as simple as a lot of the alternatives that seem like they're kind of in the same classification but aren't. But when it comes to 2D versus 3D, really not a lot of difference. I generally like to start people off with 2D just because they don't have to navigate around the editor as much. It's just a flat screen instead of them getting used to holding down the right mouse button and WASDing around, right? If they're used to first-person shooters or whatever on PC, they can start with a 3D game. But other than that, I like to do them on 2D just for the editor navigation stuff, because code-wise, there's really not any difference. The 2D stuff is, in a 3D place, it's just set on a 0 for the Z plane usually. And then we use different collider boxes. We use the 2D colliders instead of the regular ones. But that's pretty much the only difference. So if you have a 3D idea, it's cool. I probably wouldn't do it unless it was hyper casual type thing for the first one. But maybe you want to make like a really simple game where you aim and shoot at stuff, or like a little first-person shooter. Surprisingly, a first-person shooter is extremely easy to build in Unity.
No kidding.
It's not very complicated. You just have to be able to turn a character, move forward, and then fire a ray cast out for the most basics, right? You're turning, you spin the character, W moves, you read the horizontal and vertical axis from the input manager to move around, click to shoot and fire off a particle or an object, and you're done.
Yeah, I watched a video you did a while back where you were making like these kind of convex or concave shapes. I forget which video that was. You were kind of dragging polygons around, and you made this little kind of room in 3D space, and you were just doing it so casually while you were talking. I was like, I want to do that. Like you had mastery enough of the tools to kind of make it look like Minecraft, where you were just kind of like building something and it looked fun, and like you were able to kind of engrade your creativity rather than like, what does this button do? Like, kind of instructions. And like, that's where I want to get to. And I thought the 3D looked like a lot of fun to be able to do that with, but I know I need to kind of slow things down and like not.
I wouldn't worry too much about it, because I mean the 3D stuff. If it's interesting and it'll motivate you, I'd jump right into it. Because if you want to just do some level building and build some stuff for it, I'd say go for it. It's not, like I said, it's really not that more complicated. You just using 3D objects instead of 2D ones, and building levels and stuff. Building good levels is hard, but building levels you can learn that really fast. You can get that process down and get used to it. With the latest versions of Unity, so I think it's 2018.2 and on, ProBuilder is just built in as a package in the package manager. So you should go to Window Package Manager and pull that in. You can build out levels even faster. I'd say maybe watch a couple tutorial videos on it, because once you do that, you get used to hitting like Control E to extrude a face and then pull it out, and you can make these weird shapes even without being good at 3D art or 3D modeling at all. So I'm terrible artist, but I can make a basic level in there really quick just because it's got the tools there to expand this out, like raise this part and move it around or whatever, or cut this hole. If I want to cut a hole through something, I put an object there, put another object there, and then use the intersect tool in ProBuilder, and it'll cut from one to another and stuff like that. So if you want to do 3D stuff, I'd definitely check that out too. I mean, don't force yourself to use it just to get started. But once you want to start doing more complicated shapes, you want to add in like a staircase. It's just an option in there. Pick staircase, pick the size and the steps, and it'll build it for you. So you can kind of save a lot of time and build some neat things. Which may have been what you saw me doing, was using ProBuilder too, because I tend to use it a lot now.
Yeah, I watched it a while back, so I'm not really sure. But well, I was kind of thinking with the 3D stuff, it's like, well, maybe I would be less tempted to kind of go and code it myself because I'm just not able to do some of that stuff. So it kind of maybe forced me to use the UI a little bit.
Yeah. And you'll find, I think when you're building a 3D game, it becomes a little bit easier to see where the seams are of stuff too, and know where like this code should be on this object and this should be on this. Like I find that with 2D stuff, a lot of the time you end up with more monolithic classes because people just kind of get into the mode of like, this is the game and it's not a bunch of little objects. But when you're in 3D mode, it's like you're seeing all these objects. You know that, this barrel, the code handling this barrel should not be on something other than the barrel, right? Like it shouldn't be over here on the player or something. It's very obvious to it, where you see it in a 2D space. And I think or like, especially like 2D puzzle games or simple games, it gets a lot more, monolithic and messy, but it's simple at first. So I think it helps a lot with that. When you're building these 3D games, you can see these seams and see where your code goes, and also end up with nice, small, clean classes instead of the big messes.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And speaking of making big messes, one of the things that I did spend a lot of time kind of doing poorly was just animation. And every time I see you use like the animator tool, it just looks really easy. Like kind of spinning out those keyframes or whatever. I was wondering if you had any advice for kind of how to use that or get started with that the animators.
Oh, so I think right now we're talking about the building custom animations in Unity, right? So you go to window and then go to the animation window and then record. So I love that thing. It's great for a ton of problems. There are a lot of issues where people think that they need to code something to make this thing go to here and then spin and do this. And you can just animate it and you can do it really fast. The one thing that you want to watch out for, and anybody that's kind of watching or listening, if you want to do this, so you go to window and animator and it'll open up, or animation, sorry. Go to window and animation and it'll open up the animation window, which is different from the animator window that has the animator controller. Animation window has the keyframes on it. And what it'll do is it'll give you a little button there to choose create new animation, and it'll create an animation for whatever game object is selected in the hierarchy. So you want to make sure that it's the correct object. Now, if you want to move things though, and this is kind of where I was going with this tip, you want to do it not on the object that you're moving, because the positions that you're recording are world space positions.
Okay.
So you need to do it on a parent object. So what I do to cheat around this is I create like a empty game object that's a parent that's at the same position as the other thing I want to move. And then I put the animation on the parent and animate the child, because then the child's positions and stuff are all relative to the parent. So the animation position and movement and stuff is all relative. And it works totally fine. You just have to have that empty object kind of up above that's controlling it.
Okay, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. You say, I think that's the thing I was missing when I kind of experimented with it before. And so when I left the animator, I was like, that seems like an advanced feature for people who are making like the next Smash Brothers or whatever. Like I don't need to mess with this for a game. But it sounds like actually, if I had just kind of had the parent container be the point of reference, then everything would have been better. And it would have happened from the character's perspective rather than the world.
If you don't move it in the scene, if you just place it and animate it there, it'll work. But the other big thing on there with the animator that I think a lot of people miss is you can animate any property on a mono behavior. It's not just the position, the transform, and the rotation and the scale. You can animate the colors. You can animate the variables in your code. anything that you've exposed basically can be animated. So I'll use it for all kinds of stuff, everything from pulsing a button to you could even animate game state if you wanted to. I probably wouldn't do that, but you can do all kinds of crazy stuff, and I generally do a lot of stuff with that because it's just nice and simple, and it's very easy to edit, and you don't have to be a coder to understand it. So a lot of time I'll work with game designers or artists and have them go in and I'll make an animation and then like, hey, go ahead and tweak this and make it how you actually want it, make it the right colors and the right sizes and stuff. But here's the placeholder, and then they can go in and do it because it's very familiar and easy tool. It's not code. Right? If you
Okay.
code stuff, it's super hard. Or if you give them little fields to put in the values, like, oh, hey, it's going to move 5 meters and 10. I mean, I've seen and done all these kinds of things and realized later, like, oh, that was terrible. Like, I could have literally just given them a little simple tool that's already built in that lets them create the animation and do the whole thing. So, yeah,
I used iTween a little bit. I don't know if you heard of that one. But
yeah.
basically let you kind of tween from this number to that number. And so I did a lot of that stuff in code because I was fighting the tools, and I wasn't really sure whether tools like Animator were kind of like beginner friendly or not. Because I know like I look at things like videos on shaders, whatever. It definitely seems like not something I should be messing with at this point in my journey. But it seems like Animator is a good early investment for me.
It's good. Yeah, it's definitely good for just knowing that it's there and thinking about it when you have a use case for it. So if you have something on your UI that you want to animate, like you can probably just record it and then just adjust the playback speed. Like maybe you want it to speed up over time or whatever, or it goes faster based on user input. You just set the animation speed and do the same thing and not have to worry so much about physics and debugging things when it's all going to be a very like set of values. So you know what's going to happen and can predetermine it, and then it can't break either because you can't get out of that animation, right? You're only doing things that were recorded. You're not doing other things.
Let me ask you too. One thing I found myself doing all the time was just drawing rectangles, and so I actually finally memorized like new texture 2D and drag the mesh and like set the color and whatever, because I would want to like highlight something, like if I moused over something, I would want it to have either the square or whatever to, or have a box around it or whatever. But it just felt like I was doing that totally wrong. It felt like there should be some other way to kind of like highlight or emphasize something, or maybe I don't know.
So what kind of things were you highlighting here?
So it was I'm thinking primarily about the roguelike, where it's I had kind of squares, so I wanted to like select where I was going or be able to kind of target something. So I figured that would be kind of a common thing where like I mouse over something and I wanted it to, I wanted to have this like targeting system that would kind of like light up the things that were available, and I was doing that all with rectangles.
Oh, okay, interesting. But I wonder how did that work with rectangles though? How do the rectangles okay. Yeah, so normally I think it just rough hand thinking about it, I think we would come up with like just a targeting reticle type system. Is that what you had, just a reticle system where you click and then these rectangles appear?
Yeah. Well, I'd like click the character, and then I would see like I would want to like highlight his available moves or the areas he would be able to hit or stuff like that. If there was like an exit, I would want the exit sign to be like red or yellow or green or something, depending on what I could do there.
Oh, okay, cool. So did you build your tiles with prefabs then, or something else?
I ended up swapping over to, I started with prefabs because that was the tutorial I started with, and kind of built off from there. Then I ended up finding a tile map library. I think this was, I think the new tile map stuff in Unity had come out already, but I didn't know about it. And so it
was pretty new. Yeah.
Okay. And so I found one that took care of like the pooling and stuff for me. And so, because one of the first things I did was like, I started with this roguelike tutorial on Unity. I built my thing, it was great. And then I made a bigger map and it crumbled. So then I figured out about the pooling and just design patterns that I wasn't used to dealing with as often in web development, was suddenly like all over the place here. And so I found a nice library. I think it was called Tile Mapper, that would handle that pooling for me. And so it kind of swapped the tiles out, so I didn't just have thousands of them created. And so I was using that and kind of struggling with that third-party tool, and spending all this time recreating wheels and
while Unity was doing it in parallel, I think.
Yeah, and trying to learn like what I liked about games at the same time, because I really didn't know what it was that I was trying to make, or like the things about the style game that I even liked. So I'm like trying to design a game while learning Unity, while doing other dumb stuff.
Yeah, I get it. That's like one of the main reasons that I like to recommend people recreate things that are very basic, just so you can do the learning without having to do the thinking about, is this going to be fun, and trying to figure that out at the same time. Just like, this thing's fun. You just have to figure out how it's made and then make it, right? And then once you've got that down, you start making your own fun things. But I like building your own personal projects is a huge driver. So never really say don't do that.
Yeah, I think that was the big lesson that I learned there, was that I can't shortcut that part. Like, I thought I knew how to code, so let me just think about this game and I'll just make it, because I don't have to worry about that piece of the puzzle. And what I found is, like, going in, seeing the IDE, seeing the different patterns, seeing the different tools and different ways of solving problems, is like, you know what, I don't know this kind of programming. And I was having a hard time kind of finding resources that were like really kind of that were lighter on the stuff that I already knew, but focused on like the things like the ID and whatnot that I was kind of struggling with. But actually, I found channels like yours and whatnot that kind of focused on some of those tools that were more practical. So that was nice. I could see, like, oh, okay, here's how I do the one thing I need to. And then I would subscribe, of course, and watch a few more videos. So that helped a lot. But by that point, the game had kind of ground to a halt. And so I haven't really picked back up in the last couple of months. So I'm trying to start something else. But now I've got a couple ideas.
Nice. One of the things you mentioned there too was the patterns and how they were different.
Yep.
I thought it was kind of interesting, because it's something that I shouldn't put my fingers in front of my mouth, but it's something that I noticed a lot of when I would go back and forth. And it was, weirdly enough, for me, it was kind of the opposite direction. So I did a good amount of business development stuff, and then I spent a lot of time in game stuff, and went back to business development, doing Windows type stuff, and seeing the patterns that were used there and how different they were. It was kind of eye-opening to me, I guess, at the time. Like, I hadn't been used to seeing things like repository patterns. Like, it was just not something I had ever seen in a game. So it was a lot of that stuff that kind of popped up, and I felt like it helped me a lot, just kind of getting that broader perspective and re-expanding it. But I'm curious how you've seen it, like the pattern differences.
Yeah, the two big ones were like the state machines and pooling, which just seemed to be everywhere. And those are things like, I dealt with, like they would come up, but a lot of times they're just handled like by a library. Like, I would get a database connection from a pool or something.
Yeah.
A red pool. And like, that was it. I just knew that was there and taken care of for me, and that's all I needed to know about it. But here it was like a constant problem where I would like start shooting bullets, and by the 10th bullet, everything is creeping. It's like, okay, well, I need to start thinking about pooling, and like, how do I do that? And so I knew that became very quickly apparent that this is going to be a very common thing for me to do. And so I needed to look at how other people were solving these types of problems, because I didn't think people were going and creating these new pool objects every time they needed to do something. So I learned a little bit about that there. And the state machines too, that was something where it just, it seemed so common, and it seemed like people thought about things that way so often. But actually, one of the different patterns, I don't know if there's a name for it, but I guess in the kind of web development world, I'm so used to having like a database that like rigidly defines my data. And then I've got these kind of actors that can have those behaviors that model that data. But if I wanted to go see the data, like there was one spot and one tool I could use to interact with that. And I come over to Game Land, and I don't want to be requiring a SQL Server database in my game, right? So
Right.
I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I still centralize that data and deal with in one spot? Are we looking at flat files, or where is that data? And that was something that was totally missing from tutorials, because it looked like it was just kind of spread out. Like, I would go to the player class to see what the player hit points were, and I would go to the enemy thing to look at the enemy hit points, and that just felt off to me. But I didn't know if it was because it was different from what I was used to, or if it was just for tutorial purposes only.
So I think there are a couple of different ways that I've dealt with this problem in the past with just storing data. SQL Server on MMOs, great. But like you said, in a regular game, it doesn't make sense at all. I've seen people try to use things like SQLite or embedded too, but I also just don't feel like it's the best way to do it. What I generally like to do is store stuff on scriptable objects now. So I'll create settings objects that have the data that I want, either for a character or a just general game state type thing, and then just put it onto those scriptable objects, and then we can just go in and edit them. I also like to make custom editors for them when it makes sense too, though, so that it's not just a list of a bunch of strings or ints or whatever. Sometimes it'll be like a health bar with a slider that shows some extra data other than just a slider. Also, by the way, when you're doing these, if you end up making scriptable objects that do these, make sure that you look at all of the attributes that are available in the editor. You know how you put the little square code attributes on there? You can put things like range. Have you used these before, like the range attribute?
Yeah, a little bit in the editor. In order so you can like do a slider, you could have an array of tiles or things like that.
Yeah, and it's great. Like I like the range one a lot because it gives you a little slider with a min and max value and a text editor just automatically, or the tooltip one, or there are a bunch of different editors that you can put. You can make a multi-line thing. Just putting those into the data and then just building out all of the data options, there's data in the settings into those scriptable objects. One of the other benefits there, though, is that it kind of enforces that separation of data and logic. So if you're keeping your design data, all in these scriptable objects, and like I said, not in the player class that's actually moving the player around, then you have better separation there. You can test things, I think, a little bit easier. You can also make changes a lot easier. I can go in and change the speed of a player without messing with the player prefab, without risking breaking the player prefab accidentally because I also was changing something else or did something else. So it's all very clean and very separate. And then, like I said, the code is very separate too. So you don't have that data and logic just kind of mixed in there. Now, a lot of the examples that you'll see, that's exactly how it is. It's data and logic mixed right into the class. And I think that's pretty common for just a lot of programming in general. That's pretty much how I used to code completely, like when I first started learning about object-oriented programming. But now I tend to minimize the amount of data that's on classes like that. So if it's on a class that's doing stuff, I try to minimize that data and instead have it reference data objects that are, maybe shared across multiple systems or used and read by multiple systems. I feel like it comes out a lot cleaner, a lot simpler, a lot easier to maintain. And then I don't end up with weird, odd dependencies. They say you've got your player and your player's got a speed, and then you've got some other little thing that just wants to show the player speed on the UI, right? Like if it's just a scriptable object for the settings, I can assign that scriptable settings object to the UI element, and it can just read that, not know about players, not care that players even exist. What I usually see, though, is instead it's calling like player.instance.lives and reading that and stuff. So I like the benefit there that you get from saving some of that data into scriptable objects. Now, there's also, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a segment of people who are using scriptable objects to store their current data. So not just like, instead of it being like the total lives, it'd be like the current number. I have not found myself doing that yet. I tried it out a little bit, but it felt like it overcomplicated things. So the way that they do it is they make these scriptable objects that are more generic, where you just assign a value to it. So you create like an int object and you assign a value to it. Maybe you name it health, and then you assign that all around. I think it can work really well. It just, for me, it moves the dependencies outside of the code editor so much that it makes it harder. I feel like it makes it harder for me because I'm very much go into Visual Studio or Writer and hit Shift F12. Let me see all the references. I want to bounce around the code and read it. And I can't do that when I do the data like that. So instead, what I'll come up with is like just a data object class, like simple Poco that I just throw the data on. Sometimes it's even just a static class because it's data that I'm never going to have more than one of in this game ever. So just whatever, stored in a static spot and not have to worry about it. But I always, just try to separate that stuff as much as possible now. And it's a relatively new thing for me too, to be honest. It's just, I felt like it's cleaning things up and it's getting a little bit more functional, and it's a lot easier to read and understand the dependencies and the flow of the code that way.
Yeah, it keeps all in one spot too. So I like the idea that I can make those changes right there rather than me messing with a CSV file in Excel or something, some other environment that I need to hop out to. And I like the
Google Doc or Google Sheets. Yeah. I've seen a lot of that too. People are like, oh, I'm put all my data in Google Sheets, and now I can go update this sheet and my game updates. Like, still having to go to two places. You could just do that in the game. Like, I don't know. I can see some benefits for it, but I think it generally adds too much complication and unnecessary complication, right?
Yeah, and Unity makes it so easy to expose those properties. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Take advantage of the tool.
Speaking of, if you've never used Odin Inspector, you should Definitely try that out too. So it makes it so a lot of the things that aren't normally easy to expose, like a dictionary, are very easy to expose. So you just add an attribute and it works. So it gives you a lot of extra editor enhancements. It's a really cool tool. One of my favorites.
Oh, very nice. Do you have any other recommendations for kind of tools that like might make things a little easier for someone who's familiar with coding already?
I don't know about for coding specifically, but Doozy UI has been a big one. I've just recently started using it, and it came highly recommended by a lot of people. It's great for just building UI interaction systems. So if you are building that, mobile game that has 10 windows and stuff, and you want to just focus on the core thing, this UI pack seems pretty good at just abstracting away a lot of that, so that you're not coding these transitions. Like I click on this menu, I go to this one. It's all more of like almost like a builder system with DoTween, or I think it's using DoTween, not iTween. But they're basically the same. And then it's going in and doing animations on the windows, making them pop and shake and all that all the cool stuff that you would want to do, but without wasting your time building UIs, right? Like, because nobody gets into game development because they're like, oh, I really want to make cool transitions between level menus and stuff. They want to make the fun gameplay part. So I'd say definitely try that one out too. It's really cool. I like it. I just need a new project that I can drop it into. So it won't fit into the one I've got now because it's already got UI. But anything new, I'm gonna be using that.
You remind me, one of the biggest things I struggled with is the UI. Like things like adding buttons, and it was I kind of tried to drag it in there to this like weird kind of scaling box. Like it looked too big. It looked different than the rest of the game. I'm like, I'm just trying to add some buttons, guys. What's going on here? Yeah. I don't know. Like, is there like I guess that's just like a whole other thing that you just got to kind of dive into and get used to the way they want you to do those UI elements.
It is. It's kind of like learning a little bit of CSS. Right? Mm-hmm. I kind of equate it. It's not like the core thing that you're doing, but whenever you're doing UI stuff, you have to kind of understand the pivots and the anchors a little bit, and then the transitions. But like I said, the Doozy one just makes the transitions and stuff a whole lot easier. Doesn't really, from what I remember, fix up the getting things scaled right and all that and figuring that all out. But it's just a whole separate skill set.
Yeah, I did eventually get there. I think I figured out most of the things I was wrestling with, but just the first thought I was like, okay, let me drag a button down here and add some text, and whoa, what is going on?
Yeah. Speaking of text, are you using the regular text or Text Mesh Pro?
Definitely not Text Mesh Pro.
Oh, yeah, definitely use that. It's built into the package manager now too. So it was such an awesome asset that they brought the guy in who was doing it to make it part of Unity. So it's really cool. He's a really cool guy too.
Because my text would look okay in the game. I published it, and it would look like crap. I didn't know if
Text Mesh Pro just does really nice scaled text, and you can add effects to it. Once you try it out and start looking at all the options, you'll see it's like pages of options instead of just the normal. You can add like a bevel or an outline and color the outline and a glow and all the stuff that you would see in like a Photoshop text editing type stuff, or at least most of it.
Okay, so that sounds great.
It's really cool. And it's more performant too, which is amazing. Like it runs better, looks better, and it's easier to use. So
definitely. I've been tempted to kind of make just like some little apps in Unity that aren't even really games. Like I see that they're pushing stuff for like movies and like automotive and like architectural uses. But I thought about just making like a little stupid like mobile app in it. Maybe I could do some cool graphics in there, but just as a way of kind of getting used to the UI stuff a little bit. Have a couple buttons, have it open. Just send a message to a web server somewhere, open a garage door or whatever.
Make it do something useful, right? That's the number one thing. Like if you can solve any problem that you've got at home with it, like opening your door or adjusting your lights or whatever it is, I think it's a great idea. There's a ton of opportunity out there for non-game Unity development too. It's pretty huge from what I've seen. One of the projects I kind of toyed around with and would actually like to build out one day soon that kind of falls along that line is a thing I like to play a lot of Magic the Gathering, the old card game. So I like to build like a multiplayer life counter thing where I've got like a big screen in the middle and then everybody can control their own things on their phone and it's all synced up and stuff. I think it'd be really neat, and it'd be a fun but not too complicated project because I can make network calls or REST calls or whatever I need to decide to do. I'll probably just use UNet or something simple, or maybe not UNet since it's going away. But so use something simple to just make the calls back and forth and show some stuff on the UI. I mean, it fits into kind of what you were saying, but solves a problem that I have. So I'd look for things like that where it's just like something that would be cool to solve and do something like that, build it up quick.
Yeah, I've already got some websites out there with databases and APIs, and so maybe I can find something that's kind of interesting to do on the phone there, just to kind of do that, because it is a nice way to do cross-platform development or mobile apps.
Well, it is, like I said, the cross-platform, I think, to the extreme, because it works on everything. It works on all the mobile ones, but you also have all the desktop platforms, including Linux even, and all the consoles. Consoles do require extra stuff and generally approval, but but you can go out to them all. But I think that just the idea of cross-platform app development too, it's pretty cool for that, because you can do a lot of things that you can't do. It is a little bit heavier though. They're working on a new stripped down version of Unity for web stuff, the Unity Tiny. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think it's supposed to shrink the size down to something tiny, obviously. Like they're going down to low megabytes, so it sounds pretty interesting. But I think just being able to build out to a WebGL project and have your same app run on the web that also runs in a Windows environment and on a Mac and on your Android phone with pretty much no code change is amazing, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it's definitely the simplest way to build cross-platform apps. Maybe not the simplest way to build all cross-platform apps, but if you just want Hello World running on both things or all the devices, including your BlackBerry, like, yeah, it's super basic, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's only a handful of options for doing that sort of thing, and so like, why not Unity? If I need to do some sort of native app, like, it seems like it'd be my first choice.
Yeah, it does have, like I said, some drawbacks though on performance. Like battery usage is still not the best, but may not matter, right? If it's something that's not running in the background the whole time. And then the install size. But I think that install size is less of an issue now. I think 10 years ago, it was probably a big issue, and they used to limit what you could download pretty significantly. But now it's, sizes are so small or so big, so small compared to what we have available, right? I just went and swapped out my phone a couple days ago and realized I'd used like 3 of 128 gigs on the phone. Like, oh, okay. Like, we're going to transfer your data like 30 seconds. Oh, that was fast.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, well, what am I going to put on here? It's certainly not, I'm not going to fill up 128 gigs of apps. So,
you're right. Yeah, it's a great time to be a dev, for sure.
It is. And just to be alive.
Yeah.
I don't envy old people from back in the day when I was a kid,
Yeah, I do love like resources like yours. Like, it's great that I can go to YouTube and find now hours and hours and hours and hours of video that's like dedicated to helping me solve the problems that I want to solve.
It's awesome and amazing. That didn't exist when I started too in Unity. It's so strange. Like, just watching that whole thing grow. Like, a lot of the guys that are big now started their YouTube stuff after I started doing Unity. And the only option I had was like one book that was at the bookstore. Right. I was like, okay, I'll go grab that one book and read it, and hopefully it helps. I mean, it helped a bit, but most of it was just experimentation and learning and watching. Like, I like that there are so many resources out there too, because I watch them all the time too. But I also watch a lot of non-coding or non-game coding resources, I should say. Like, I love watching Uncle Bob videos and just anything about architecture and clean code type stuff. It's always a blast. I feel like I'm always learning something new.
Yeah, I really like listening to the Debug Lounge too. Not sure if you listen to them, but great. And sometimes they talk about kind of like design patterns or whatever, but also they go like high level and they'll talk about like player unknown battlegrounds in an episode, and they'll just kind of talk about the game mechanics and why it works or whatever. It's a really interesting show. Yeah,
I love it. Those guys are cool too. I got to meet them same place I met the Text Mesh Pro guy down at Universal Studios. That was a blast. At the last Unite, not the last one, the one before that, they'd rented out Universal Studios for the conference or part of it. Nice. It's a fun party, and just got to meet a whole ton of people. It's a blast. The game development community is always really cool, though.
Yeah, speaking of,
they're very outgoing and talkative usually, and
yeah, I love sharing. I love seeing this stuff too. Like, speaking of community, so I subscribe to a couple Reddits like Procedural Generation and a couple others, GameDev, and it's really cool to see. But I was wondering if you had any recommendations for like places where people are like actively engaging and talking and like kind of working on projects and sharing? Like any communities that you would recommend?
Oh, well, are you on the Unity3D subreddit?
I believe so.
Okay, that one's pretty good. I also get on the Unity2D subreddit, so if you're doing any 2D related stuff, find lots of cool stuff. There's not a whole lot of conversation there, though. I find that more in places like Discord, where people are just constantly talking and building things together, but not so much online. There probably are some good places for it, though. So if anybody is listening and knows some, please comment and let us know too, so we can find them. I'd love to check out some other sources for that stuff. But I see a lot just people talking in Discord and getting together and working together. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I've recently started watching some people Twitch stream a little bit on code, and so it's been really cool to just kind of pop in there, and it feels a little bit more social. Like sometimes I'll throw the Twitch window up, and then like I'll kind of be coding outside and trying to do my own thing, and like obviously I can't be doing that if I need to like full on concentration mode, but it's kind of nice like if it's a Sunday morning 7 a.m. whatever, just kind of have a cup of coffee, have Twitch on over there, and I'm kind of tinkering over on the other side of the screen.
Yeah, it feels like you're coding with somebody, right? Like
you're
doing the same thing. Yeah, I'm totally with you. One of my buddies, Kyle, he streams on Twitch all day coding away at his games. I think it's really interesting. I wish I had the the balls to do that, right? To just sit there and code all day, like let people watch my coding. I got to edit it first.
Right. Yeah. It'd be a lot of me like kind of staring off into space or, spilling coffee on myself or whatever.
What do I do? I'll be back in an hour. Out. No, it's usually the stepping away is when I get my good ideas. Stumble, get stuck, and then leave and come back with the solution, or get the solution and then rush back because I'm like, I got the idea. I know what to do. Got to run back and put it in.
Yeah.
It works.
That was good. I mean, I think we talked a lot about it. We kind of got into the heart of where I kind of went wrong on my previous excursions. Like I should have started smaller. It's good that I did tutorials because I got to see a little bit about what Unity had to offer. But if I had just started off on some kind of smaller games, then I could have kind of at least mitigated some of my losses on some of the time I bled out trying to re-implement stuff that I might have kind of stumbled across if I'd done like a throw the dart at the kind of target whatever type game.
Yeah, and that's why I like recommending those recommending that they do different types of those because then they see the different systems and get some experience with them and realize that this thing exists, or that physics is easy if you use the built-in stuff. Right?
Yeah,
or most physics is easy, I should say.
Yeah, and I'm not as scared of physics. 3D sounds like it's better than I had thought. And the match 3 game that I was thinking about going for next does not sound like it's such a good idea. And now that I think about all the different animations and different things involved and kind of making that happen, it makes a lot of sense. So,
and the game state tracking. That's I'd say if anybody's listening, if you're thinking about starting a game, like a newbie game that you want to build, think about all of the data that you need to track and the things that you need to check. Like, if you need to check, do all 3 of these blocks match? That's pretty easy. Like, do 3 blocks in a row match. But then when you need to figure out, like, where do these things fall? How do I build levels? How does this, there's a lot more to it. Like, you just got to figure all that stuff out. And then how do I do these checks fast, right? Like, where am I storing this data? Am I just moving the objects? Like, versus, Flappy Bird. Oh, I tap the screen, add force, tap the screen, add force. Like,
right.
Nice and simple, right? Like the scale of difficulty is just amazing. Like, building a Flappy Bird is 1,000 times easier than a match 3 game, even though if you asked a normal person, they'd say they're probably about the same.
Yeah. I would have guessed, like, even being like an experienced coder, I've been doing this, I don't know, like 18 years or something. Like, I would have kind of guessed that they were similar.
Yeah. It's amazing because, like, I think it's the visual style and the form factor just kind of gives that impression that, hey, it's not a 3D game with beautiful art. So it's simple, but it's, they're really a lot more complicated, which is, why programmers make the big money, right?
Yep. Hey, no good complaints there.
Good stuff. So before we go, man, I wanted to talk just briefly about CodingBlocks, your guys' podcast. And like I said earlier, I get a ton from it. I listen pretty much religiously. It's the only thing, one of the only things I'd say I do religiously is watch for that and listen as soon as I get in the car. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about, like, maybe how you guys got started, what kind of stuff you guys talk about that might be interesting to everybody else, which it is interesting. You guys go listen to it. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, we try to focus on really kind of practical day-to-day tips for programming. So some days, some episodes, we may look at like design patterns, or we may look at algorithms and data structures, or we might talk about a chapter of a book like Clean Code or something a little bit more high level. So we try to mix it up, and sometimes we do little water coolers where we just kind of talk about whatever type topics. But I think our main differentiator is just we don't really do a lot of interviews. So it's kind of the same three people, same three personalities. We kind of disagree on some things and we agree on some things, and we just kind of bash our heads together. And when we do that, sometimes we have these ideas and kind of knock the dust off and come away with something that we're really happy with. And sometimes we get a little confused and everything falls apart. But I recommend, if you like this kind of discussion, if you like talking like with real programmers about the kinds of things that we kind of struggle with and also feel good about, like kind of like we're doing right here, then I recommend checking out the shows. CodingBlocks. We have a YouTube channel too, but not really doing a whole lot there. That the podcast is definitely the main deal.
Yeah, we'll link them all for sure. And I mean, you said fall apart, but the fall apart's not really a fall apart. I still learn everything all the time. Like every time, I think when you guys fall apart, it's you guys just learned something new, and so did everybody else. Right? Like, oh, talking through this whole thing. I heard the Jamstack one just recently, and then at the end, like, oh, revelation. Like,
Yeah.
Like, that's how it works. And then I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
that was
cool.
the one
Like,
that I was specifically thinking about, where I was like, oh crap, I was wrong about something I've been talking about for however long.
yeah, but I mean, talking about it, and I think everybody that listened to it probably learned a whole lot more because of that. Like getting that process. If you just explained it like exactly right the first time, I think it wouldn't have stuck nearly as well. So it's cool, and I really like the book reviews and stuff too. You guys go over, actually reading some of the best books out there for programming and just talking about the key concepts and the key takeaways. So if you're out there listening and you really don't like reading coding books, a great way to just kind of pick up a lot of the core concepts and a lot of the good techniques without having to go through the book, and also just hear other programmers' thoughts and insights on them. Because I've read those books myself, but I'd never really heard other people talk about them. So it was really interesting kind of getting your guys' takeaways on them, occasionally yelling like, no, that's not what I think
Right.
at the car. But then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh, he was right. Damn it. So it's
sometimes yes, sometimes no.
yeah, well, usually is if it's a no, I find out later that I was wrong, and it should have been a yes. Or one of you guys will come up and correct it with an even better answer. So I really love it. Yeah, definitely check it out. And again, thanks again for coming on here, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really love your channel, and so it means a lot to be here.
Cool. Thanks.